Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Chub Chub, Luna, and Jankotron. It's 11-day mission to land on the moon and go back to Earth and to boldly go where people from the 1960s already have. Oh god. Aside from being late to the challenge by about 65 years, I'm also not doing it for real. God no. Do you know how much taxpayer money it took to get Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins to the moon? I can't even buy myself a Snickers bar. Unless, of course, if you believe the conspiracies about the moon landing. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. What I can tell you is, I am doing this challenge in everyone's favorite flight/space simulator, the one and only, and there's totally no sequel to this game, Kerbal Space Program. No, I'm not gonna do it. No, I'm not gonna answer why didn't you do this challenge on Kerbal Space Program 2. As far as I'm concerned, that game doesn't exist. What do you want me to do? No, I'm not gonna touch that game even if it gave me $1 million. This video was made with the support of my patrons and subscribers. Consider giving this video a like and subscribe to my channel. More info in the description and comments below. I've actually played Kerbal Space Program when I was still in college. This was circa 2015 to 2016, where I was more or less dealing with the final stages of my thesis and the final stages of my rocket, which would always fall short from my goal of going to the moon. After graduating and passing the boards, however, I completely forgot about KSP, and so here we are now, more or less 10 years later, but you're probably asking, 13. Why space? Does this answer your question? But seriously, for some reason, I had a massive urge to revisit my past endeavors with Kerbal Space Program, and it didn't help that I was in this NASA rabbit hole that fueled the whole obsession with anything related to space. It even got to a point where I ruined this perfectly fine aqua flask, but apparently it added to the personality of the thing, so you tell me. And now we're here, revisiting this decade-old challenge that I haven't completed since college. In my quest to reach the celestial body, no, not that body, that body. This body we call the moon. I've encountered a lot of mishaps that would make this video messier than Asmongold's room before he started cleaning up. So to make this video much coherent, I've decided to divide the video into 4 parts, or steps as I'd like to call it, and you can follow these steps to ensure 100% mission failure on your next voyage to the moon. Oh, and before we begin, I know that in KSP, the Earth is called Kerbin and the moon is called Mun, but fuck that noise, I'm gonna call it Earth and Moon because I'll have a stroke if I keep correcting myself during the script writing phase of this video because of the repeated use of Earth instead of Kerbin. So to save myself the trip to the nearest hospital and a hefty bill, since I don't have health insurance at the ripe old age of 28, bear with me as I call it Earth and Moon for the entirety of the video. So come join me and watch till the end of the video to see if I can go to the moon and back in Kerbal Space Program. On this 12,000 kilometer journey to the surface of the moon, please keep in mind that these are KSP distances and not actual distances. We're gonna need to build a trusty ship. With my experience and know-how, both of which equate to 0, I'm sure I'll be able to build a ship that's capable of completing the journey, or that's what I thought would happen. But after a few minutes of regaining all of my lost KSP knowledge and finagling with the control scheme, which for some reason sucks massive balls sometimes, I've started to get the hang of it and finally created my first rocket. I called it Chub Chub 1 for obvious reasons. This was really only meant for me to get into the groove of shooting a 50-ton chunk of metal into the upper atmosphere and towards the moon. And after hours of research and totally not taking a page from NASA in the 1960s, I managed to make something that somehow looks like it's capable. Yeah, I said it looked capable. I didn't say it was actually capable. Anyway, I knew this was gonna take a lot more than just a half-assed effort in copying what worked. So instead of copying, I just did what I usually do and just upgrade everything until I see this thing break through the sound barrier and eventually get through to space. And what I ended up with was essentially a discount version of the Saturn V, with a height of 47 meters, which is sort of the height of a space shuttle, and weighs 600 tons, give or take, equipped with 5 engines that are able to output a whopping 6,340 kilonewtons of thrust, which puts into perspective the Falcon 9 that outputs about 7,607 kilonewtons of thrust, though the Falcon 9 weighs 549 tons, which solidifies the idea that I should not be asked to create rockets that put men into space with how inefficient my rockets are. So with these inefficiencies in mind, I christen it Jankotron 1 with a mission objective of boldly go where no jank has went before. And after some final checks and adjusting of the stages, I was prepared to go launch this thing like it's the 4th of fucking July. gravity, the thing that pulls you back to Earth. And in order to leave Earth, you must overcome this force. And in a rocket that weighs 600 tons, you're gonna need a whole lot of force. That's why I've decided to go overboard and put 5 giant engines on the rocket. Unfortunately, strapping 5 engines capable of pushing you towards the sky at Mach 2 and beyond doesn't necessarily mean that I get to go to the moon, though it definitely guarantees that I can leave Earth, but without proper guidance, I'll most likely overshoot the target or completely miss it altogether. So how do we get this 600-ton piece of junk to the moon? Simple. By air quotes, understanding orbital mechanics. Full disclaimer, I only have an incredibly basic knowledge of orbital mechanics, and I even decided to launch without completely understanding the mechanics in KSP. Now, as much as I like physics, luckily the game didn't have to ask me to do the necessary calculations to get me the heck out of Earth. All I needed to do really was slingshot the rocket using Earth's gravity and the rocket's velocity, as well as a well-timed engine burn to help me escape Earth's gravitational influence. I just needed to do a little bit of planning using the maneuver tool, and after getting a good enough line towards the moon, I tested my idea and completely missed my mark. This is in part because I didn't really understand what the nav ball in the center of the screen was telling me, but a quick read on the KSP wiki helps. What really helped me though was understanding what prograde and retrograde meant and which one was the maneuver symbol. Though when I finally understood what the symbols meant, it was already too late, since by some sheer miracle, I did something right and managed to do a semi-correct burn towards the moon without following the maneuver marker on the nav ball. Unfortunately, while this was technically a path that gets me towards the moon, the initial burn was too much and I had to waste more fuel to do a retrograde burn in order to get me back on track. Luckily, I didn't have to spend days floating in space just to travel to the moon. With the power of time warp, I was already approaching the moon. With me still not knowing whether or not I'm in the moon's orbit, I did a few random retrograde burns just to see if I could get into lunar orbit. I did eventually reach the moon and eventually got into its orbit, and all that's left for me to do really is to bleed more speed to land onto the moon. And with my impatience, there was a couple of times where I crashed onto the surface. And here's the part where I was thinking, why can't time warp operate smoothly? Ugh. Anyway, as I was patiently floating downwards, it gave me some time to contemplate about some things, such as the sheer difficulty of doing this activity for real. It puts into perspective the preparation, manpower, and money needed to do this, and it also reminded me of accidents that happened before, such as Apollo 13, wherein during their whole debacle with an exploding tank and whatnot, had to also deal with the incredibly cold temperatures inside the cabin because of the damage done by the explosion. And on top of all this, they had to do a manual burn / course correction while under these conditions. A lesser person would buckle under the stresses of all of these, and there were moments in this game where I overshot the moon and the Kerbals were essentially lost in space. It made me realize how lucky the crew of Apollo 13 was and how close they were to being lost. But anyway, as I was inching ever closer to the lunar surface, I had to do this little dance where I had to adjust my thrust in order to land smoothly. And after almost tipping over my ship and almost failing this entire mission again, I was finally on lunar soil. I had Jebediah get out of the capsule, plant a flag, and quote Neil Armstrong. And after witnessing a lunar sunrise, I did a few science experiments while I was there, but since this was in sandbox mode, it was more or less just for show since I couldn't gain science points from it. With a flag planted on the lunar surface, experiments done, and Jebediah inside the capsule, it was time to leave. Unfortunately, my stupidity once again rears its ugly head and another problem came up. I severely underestimated how much fuel it would take for me to leave the moon's orbit and course correct to get back to Earth, so now I had to be as efficient as possible with my maneuvers and burns in order to get back. It got to a point where I broke off parts in an effort to be lighter, and I even started thinking that I could throw out the equipment inside the cabin to reduce more weight. Unfortunately, KSP didn't allow that, so my dreams of being Matt Damon from The Martian was promptly thrown out of the window. Anyway, after getting a 10 out of 10 exit out of the moon's orbit and with the Earth in full view, I cut my engines and planned another burn that would put me in the path back to Earth. Unfortunately, during re-entry, I realized that the reaction wheel was placed after the decoupler, which means that instead of the heat shield taking the brunt of the heat of re-entry, the reaction wheel would go first. At first, I thought this was fine. I didn't think it would do anything to the capsule. In fact, during the first few seconds seconds of re-entry, everything was going fine. I was thinking that after its inevitable end, it would just expose the heat shield and all I needed to do was wait for the chutes to open up and I'm back on the surface. Or so I'd like to think. While it was fine during the first few seconds, with the atmosphere thickening up, the reaction wheel was getting dragged upwards and causing the capsule to flip, and it eventually exposed the unshielded side of the capsule. I tried controlling the capsule to flip over again, but having no control surfaces to help me flip this capsule back over only meant that this entire re-entry was gonna end badly. In short, aerodynamics is a bitch. Anyway, the capsule exploded and I was forced to do this re-entry again. For this one, I took a page out of SpaceX and tried to do the re-entry with the final stage still hooked up to the capsule and use it as some sort of drag chute to slow me down on descent. I'm also observing for whether or not the ship would tip itself over and shoot itself back to Earth like a dart. Unfortunately, I saw it almost tipping over, so I immediately detached the final stage from the capsule. I tried controlling the capsule as best as I could to use the control wheel to take the brunt of the re-entry heat. For a few seconds there, I thought the entire thing exploded. Not gonna lie, with how the game works, I thought the capsule actually exploded. I mean, it looked like the capsule exploded, didn't it? But nope, the capsule comes out of the smoke and I opened the chutes and all that I needed to do was wait for splashdown. So can an idiot go to the moon and back in Kerbal Space Program? Yeah, I mean, it's pretty doable. Not only was it challenging, it made me look up things that helped me understand space travel even more. You know, because in the off chance that NASA might be looking for a nurse to go to space, you know, in a third world country, I'm totally your guy, NASA. Wink wink, nudge nudge. But seriously though, aside from the challenge of just making it to the moon and landing back on Earth, the whole creating your own rocket was almost as fun as the journey itself. Hell, I used to spend an entire day just building rockets back when I was in college playing KSP. It's just too bad that this game never spawned a sequel, right guys? So what game or challenge should I take on next? Drop your answers in the comments down below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Consider joining my Patreon for more behind the scenes content, as well as my Discord community server, and subscribe so I can build my own rocket. Until next time.